Hello, my name is Sam Feltham and welcome to Expert Interviews here on Smash the Fat. With me today is registered dietitian Franziska Spritzler, all the way from LA, California. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Sam. How about you?
Yeah, all good in the hood. And it was LA, wasn't it? Or was it somewhere else in California?
It's about an hour south of LA, Huntington Beach, but same area.
Huntington Beach, very nice. Sounds very good. Sounds very good. I'd love to live on a beach, but the best we got is the Thames here in London. But hey,
Oh, that's
what are you gonna
lovely.
do?
I was in London last year. It's beautiful, but you should
It
come out
is.
someday. Come out to Southern
Yeah.
California and you'll love it.
Oh, absolutely. Undoubtedly. Cool. So the reason that I wanted to get you on the show today is to talk about fatty acid facts. Obviously there's been a lot of talk in kind of the past 10 years, especially with kind of the paleo and low carb movement, about how dangerous polyunsaturated fats can be in terms of their oxidization and things like that. And that's what we're going to kind of focus on with you today. But before we do get into that, what I want to find out is kind of your backstory, why you became a dietitian, how you became a dietitian, and, why you want to help people.
Sure. So I was a court reporter before I became a dietitian. I was a court reporter for about 10 years, and in my mid-30s, about 2003, I decided to go back to school to be a dietitian because that was really my passion. I knew I didn't want to be a court reporter for another 30 years or so, and my husband was really supportive about it. He knew how interested I was, and I was not a low-carb person back then. I was definitely more on the low-fat side. Many people don't know this, but I was actually quite overweight at one time in my teens, and I lost weight not via a low-carb diet, but via I would say, just a eating less kind of diet. It wasn't necessarily low-fat, but it certainly wasn't low-carb either. And I maintained that weight for a long time. So it wasn't so much that I was interested in weight control. I was really interested in health. And I'd always had high cholesterol levels, and I thought trying to manage that with a dietary approach rather than going on medication. That's what I wanted to do. My mother was on medication for it, and I wanted to avoid that. So I went back to school to become a dietitian, and I became a dietitian in 2008. 2008. And I worked at a large hospital for several years, and about 3.5 years ago, I discovered that my blood sugars were going up after I ate food. They were normal fasting. But even I wasn't a big eater. As I said, I'd kind of been controlling my weight for a while, just eating less, trying to be active, eating well. But my blood sugar was still going up after meals, even though I wasn't eating a ton of carbohydrates and I was avoiding refined carbs. So I started investigating how to bring down my postprandial blood sugar levels, and I found low carb, and it worked so well. I found the amount that I could eat and still maintain good blood sugar levels, and my interest just started really. I was already interested in diabetes, but it became so much more of a passion of mine because I heard from other people. I started my website, Low Carb Dietitian, and I heard from a lot of people with diabetes who said, every dietitian I talk to tells me to eat more whole grains, tells me to snack every few hours and make sure that I never have a meal without carbs, and you're saying something different, and this has really helped me. And that kind of became my mission, and never really forgot about fatty acids, though. I loved that all through college. I did a lot of my papers on fatty acids, so it's nice now to be able to be in a position where I'm working for myself and I can look into carb restriction and blood sugar management, but also address some of these concerns about fats people have. And my own cholesterol, I don't know if you read that blog post, but that was a huge, very controversial blog post I did on my own lipid levels going up a lot after I went very low carb. So it's really neat to be able to address all of this, and it all comes back to just wanting to help people and doing the most nutritious diet I can do and taking that message to others.
Absolutely, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's what it's really all about. This style of eating is all about nutrition. It's all about eating nutritious food that's healthy for you, particularly for you. As we said kind of at the beginning, there's been a lot of talk in terms of whether polyunsaturated fats are bad, and kind of particularly from vegetable oil sources and things like that. But then also at the same time, they're kind of high in nuts as well. So a lot of people have kind of created what you've aptly called PUFA-phobia. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's polyunsaturated fatty acids. That's the PUFA, and having PUFA-phobia. So firstly, let's kind of go into why people might be worried about polyunsaturated fats, and maybe why they might not want to be so scared of it when it comes to kind of nuts and fish and stuff like that.
Sure. So polyunsaturated fats are just one class of fatty acids. There's saturated fats that have no double bonds, monounsaturated fats, which have more than one, one, and polyunsaturated fats that have more than one. So poly means more than one, or many. And polyunsaturated fats tend to be the most unstable of those three, and a lot of the vegetable oils that we've been told to use for the last, 3 decades or so, those are very high in polyunsaturated fats, but they've also been highly refined. They're already damaged before we even pour them into the pan to cook with, but then become even more oxidized. That is a danger, and unfortunately they really have gotten into our food supply. They're in everything. They're in crackers. They're in so many different things. And so our intake of omega-6 fatty acids has become very, very high. The PUFAs, the omega-6s, those are the vegetable oils. However, people have taken this message of, that PUFAs being inflammatory and staying away from them, they've taken that a bit too far. So now they're looking at all the foods and saying, wow, nuts are high in PUFAs too, especially walnuts. I shouldn't eat those. I really want to concentrate on saturated fats and monounsaturated fats, so I'm going to stay away from them. And unfortunately, you're missing, when you do that, you miss out on a lot of benefits. First of all, nuts are primarily monounsaturated anyway. They only have a small amount of polyunsaturated fats. Now, I would say having them raw or dehydrating them is better. You're not going to oxidize the oils that are in the type that you get that are roasted, or if you roast them yourself. And you don't want to roast them in vegetable oil, certainly, because as I said, that's a damaged oil already. So I was just really concerned that people, I understand that right now saturated fat is being embraced, which is good. We shouldn't be fearful of it, but to go the other way and to say saturated fat is where we should be concentrating all of our efforts and staying away from anything unsaturated, especially polyunsaturated fats, that does us a lot of damage. We do need some omega-6s. Omega-3s, we generally don't get enough of those. The long chain type are in fish. And people say they eat fish. I eat fish, I like salmon. How often are you really eating it, though? And are you getting enough omega-3s to balance the omega-6? That's my concern. But really, if you stay away from the refined vegetable oils and you're following a whole foods diet, the small amount of omega-6 fat that you get in the nuts, in the avocado, in chicken, that's another thing. People say, stay away from chicken because chicken is high in PUFAs. Well, it's not that high. It's mostly in the skin, first of all, and it's okay to have. Omega-6s do some good things for you, too. Arachidonic acid helps your body to mount a defense if it's under attack from infection. It also helps to stimulate muscles after a workout. So trying to stay away from any of the PUFAs, I don't think that's a good idea. Choosing your source as well, that's what you want to do. And whole foods, as long as you have a balance of them, I think are a really good way of doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for you, what would kind of be a good balance of omega-3 and omega-6 whole foods? What would a daily diet for someone look like?
Okay, I eat fish, salmon, or herring or sardines. I know those are most people's least favorite. It's a love or hate thing.
Mackerel's really big over here.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
Mackerel's really big over here because it's readily available and it's cheap as well.
Yeah, mackerel is good. The reason I never think of mackerel is because we don't have it too much here. I bought it canned once, and canned, it's just terrible. So I really have a bad taste in my mouth from that, but I had it when I was in London last year, and it's actually quite good. So mackerel is a great source of omega-3s. I would say having fish, I like it 3 or 4 times a week, a decent sized serving of it. And I am in favor of fish more than fish oil. I'm not a lipidologist. They would prescribe perhaps fish oil for people, and I think at a proper dosage for people who have had a heart attack or have atrial fibrillation or something like that, that's doable. But as a dietitian, I don't recommend that. I recommend eating the fatty fish. For people who say I really don't like fish, I say learn to like at least a few types, or if there's a way you can have salmon that's cooked a little bit less fishy tasting for you, somehow to get that in there. And then the omega-6s you would be getting from things like nuts. I have nuts and avocado pretty much every day. I live in California, so avocados are available year-round, and I get my omega-6 from those, and some chicken, and you'll find little bits in other foods as well. And as I said, I think just having a really well-balanced diet, plenty of plant foods in addition to animal foods. That's another thing I see people doing, concentrating too much on animal foods and kind of forgetting that we also need a balance of plants in there. And the omega-6s you're getting from plants, whole, real foods that haven't been processed, are nothing like the omega-6s you're getting from the refined oils.
Yeah, very important to make that distinction between the two, for sure. Going along with kind of moving on from polyunsaturated fats, why are monounsaturated fats so good for us? And kind of what's the deal with saturated fat? Why have we sort of been embracing it more over the 10 years? And what's it used for as well?
Okay, so monounsaturated fats tend to lower inflammation. They can lower LDL cholesterol. And they're fairly stable for cooking. They're not as stable as saturated fat, but they're much more stable than polyunsaturated fats are. So monounsaturated fats are good that way. And saturated fats, they tend to be the most satiating. I had a client who emailed me saying, I've cut back on my saturated fat a little bit because he was concerned about some cholesterol markers. And he said, I'm just not feeling as full. And I said, okay. Having some saturated fat in there, I'm not saying get rid of it altogether. I'm saying you can have some. It's just for certain people, and I'm one of them, our LDL cholesterol within the LDL particle that contains cholesterol tends to go up in number when we eat a lot of saturated fat. And there's a debate among the experts as to whether that is harmful in the context of a low-carb diet or not. I just don't think we have enough information, and I like to be cautious. So I still eat saturated fat. I eat things like cream cheese and cheese, and I use half and half in my coffee. I do those things. I don't put butter on everything. I'm not one of those people who puts butter in coffee, and I don't really recommend that for people unless they have absolutely no problems with their LDL and they're not concerned about weight gain or anything like that. I think doing too much butter can actually cause some problems with weight. But we shouldn't be afraid of it and have small amounts. So saturated fat, it's going to vary from individual to individual, your tolerance and the way that you process it.
Absolutely, because it can be a dangerous thing when something is kind of, proved to be okay, then people swing back the other way a little bit and then mount up the saturated fat. So kind of what is the evidence at the moment in terms of whether it's a good thing to have high LDL or low LDL? Okay, so I think, and this is from my review, there is a large range of LDL particles. They're actually particles that contain cholesterol. They also contain triglycerides and other things. But your LDL, if you look on a standard, I wrote them down because I know you use different measurements in England, but over here, it's up to 100 here that they want your LDL. Mine has never been that, and I don't think it ever will be. I think it can go up to, depending on the person, maybe, maybe 150, 160, depending on other things that are going on, depending on your triglycerides, depending on the type of LDL you have. Mine actually went up almost 100 points in a year when I went very, very low carb and did a lot of saturated fat, so I changed it. I still follow a very low carb diet, but the evidence is, from what we know, having small, dense LDL increases your risk of heart disease.
increase your risk of heart attack and stroke. But having a lot of LDL particles does the same thing. And right now, that's what we know. We don't have enough evidence to suggest that if you have LDL particles and they're large, if you have a lot of them, that you're at any less risk. We just don't have the data for that. We need to do more studies on long-term people who have been following a low-carb diet. About a quarter to a third of them will see that pattern where their LDL goes up very, very high, and yet their triglycerides fall, their HDL is high, their markers look good. Is that enough to protect them when you have that many LDL particles? I don't know, and that's why I said I'm cautious about it. So I don't like to get into arguments because, as I said, there's some people who will vehemently argue, you can't tell people it's okay to eat saturated fat, and others who will say, you can't tell people they have to worry unless their triglycerides are also high and they have the small dense LDL. I take a conservative approach and say, we don't know, you don't have to fear saturated fat, but depending on your lipid profile and how you feel about it, that's what I would say would determine the amount of saturated fat that you can eat.
Yeah, so important to take into account biochemical individuality, and it's just a case of just getting a blood test from your local doctor, just getting a full cholesterol profile, including the HDL, LDL, triglycerides, and then you can sort of go to a dietitian like yourself, Franziska, and sort of make an educated kind of estimate as to what would be the best diet. So for somebody that does have a lot of LDL particles, what would you say is kind of a reasonable amount of saturated fat to have in their diet on a daily basis?
Okay, that's a hard question to answer. It depends on the person. Really, if the reason that their LDL particles are high is because they have a lot of triglycerides but not a ton of cholesterol, they can have more, I would say they can have more saturated fat. For someone like myself who has very low triglycerides, very high, well, pretty high number of LDL particles and LDL cholesterol, I like to keep the cholesterol down to about maybe 25 grams of cholesterol a day. I mean, I'm sorry, of saturated fat a day.
Yeah.
That's still very, it's not super low, and I have a lot of other fat sources. I still follow a low-carbohydrate diet, but most of my fatty acid sources are monounsaturated. And then I would say saturated and then still poly. So saturated's still in the middle there. Polyunsaturated should always make up the smallest amount of the saturated fatty acids. So yeah, you can, and then somebody else, probably someone like you, and most people can have more saturated fat. It does not, if it's not increasing your LDL particles, then I don't see the rationale for limiting saturated fat unless you have some other sort of metabolic disease where saturated fat might be harmful. But for many people, it is not a harm, and that's my message, is we need to look at making it very individualized. And that's why when people come to me, I do want a lipid profile before I start making recommendations for increasing a lot of fat in their diet and telling them you don't have to worry, eat as much cheese as you want. Maybe they shouldn't be eating quite as much cheese. They can eat as much walnuts, avocados, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Now we do have a few questions on the website there, and we're going to start off with John Mason, who asks, what does Franziska think about the view that EPA, DHA, GLA are derivatives of LA and ALA, those are all acids, and are of little use, even harmful, and that we should only consider parent essential oils, and even then only in very small doses. Does that question make sense to you?
It does, and I think I know the article that he's referring to. A couple weeks ago, an article came out. I maybe will not mention the person's name. I don't know if I should or not, but he's a man who really is against fish oils. If anyone wants to know, they can email me. I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name, but I think it's okay if someone wants to email me with that question. But he was basically arguing that fish oil is very, very bad, and omega-6 and omega-3 long-chain fatty acids are not needed as long as we have the parent omega-3 and omega-6. So the parent omega-3 would be alpha-linolenic acid, which is ALA, and the parent omega-6 acid would be linoleic acid, LA. And I would argue that most people don't convert enough of the ALA and the LA into the longer chain fatty acids. And the longer chain fatty acids are the ones that have the beneficial physiological effects in our body. So for instance, ALA converts to EPA and DHA, which are two long chain omega-3 fats. And those are the ones that help to protect our brain against cognitive problems, improve mood, reduce inflammation. Those are the ones that are prescribed in fish oil for people who've had a heart attack. So those are the beneficial ones. The parent ones, we need them in very, very small amounts, and they come in nuts and seeds, and it's almost impossible living in our lifestyle that we do in the modern age that we would not get enough of either one of those. The others, the linoleic acid is converted to arachidonic acid in our body. But arachidonic acid we also get not just from the LA, we get it from eggs and animal products and a few plant products as well. But again, the arachidonic acid is the one that has the beneficial effects in the body, as I said before, with muscle growth, and it's important for brain health and for mounting a defense against infection and inflammation. And it leads to prostaglandin synthesis that is so important in mounting that immune defense. So I also know this person sells supplements of the parent acids, and as I said, I don't believe that if you're eating a diet that has plant and animal foods that you will become deficient in either alpha-linoleic acid or linoleic acid. I think you will get enough, and if you follow a well-balanced diet, you should also be getting enough of the long-chain ones, which I do think are the more important ones. And there was one other thing. I think in his article, he mentioned fish oil was very detrimental. At very high doses, it might be 6 grams or more. There are a lot of studies, as you know, that they use very, very high amounts, much higher than what's recommended for prescription use. And that's what happened. And if you use it within the correct dosage, I don't think those things are going to happen. But as I said before, eat it from whole foods when you can, not the supplements anyway.
Absolutely, whole real foods always a good message for sure. And secondly, we've got Victoria. Who asks, is Weight Watchers the best diet plan to lose weight if a person has insulin resistance, or is a ketogenic better for weight loss? And what if weight loss isn't happening on the ketogenic diet? What's going on there?
Okay, so as far as Weight Watchers versus a low-carb diet, for somebody who is insulin resistant, I would say a low-carb diet is going to be better. For someone who's not, you can lose weight on Weight Watchers. I've seen people do it. I've seen people maintain it. And probably the way that I was eating when I lost weight was similar to Weight Watchers in a lot of ways. But for someone who's insulin resistant, not only does it help you to lose weight, but it helps improve all those biomarkers. It helps to improve your triglycerides, your LDL to HDL ratio. And if you are insulin resistant, that means that the amount of carbohydrate you can eat and maintain good blood sugar levels and maintain good insulin levels in your body is pretty low. So having a lower carb diet, you're going to store less as fat, you're not going to be as hungry, you're going to see a lot of health improvements. So I would recommend a low carbohydrate diet. Does it need to be ketogenic? Here again, you're going to get so many different opinions, and I will just give my own here, and not to diss anybody else, and I know I was in Keto Clarity, but I don't think you necessarily need to be ketogenic even if you're insulin resistant. If it works for you, if that really works for you, that's great. I think long term, maybe starting off ketogenic and maybe adding a few carbs back. I prefer more the Atkins approach where it's individualized, and some people do better very close or in ketosis, and others will do better kind of in mild ketosis, in and out of ketosis, but still very low carb. The thing is keeping your insulin levels down and keeping the blood sugar from rising as quickly. If you're not losing weight on a ketogenic diet, I would look at the amount of fat. I don't agree with the advice to eat more fat if you're not losing weight, because unless you're not eating enough, there are people who start off and try to do low carb, low fat, but most people I think now have gotten the message fat is okay. They add more fat. They end up with too much energy. I don't want to say calories. I'm not a calories in, calories out person, but too much energy for your body. And unless you're in an energy deficit, you're not going to lose weight. I think it's easier on a low-carb diet, and ketogenic diets can sometimes help with appetite, but you don't necessarily need to be ketogenic, or at least not strictly so, in order to lose weight and do well, even if you have insulin resistance. Staying low-carb, I think, is key.
Absolutely, absolutely. And kind of my point of view on this is, like, obviously weight loss is all about having the flux of fatty acids out of the fat cell being less than coming into the fat cell. So if you are still having a high fat diet that's high volume, then the amount of dietary fat that's going to be fluxing into the fat cells is going to exceed that coming out. And obviously insulin is part of that in terms of locking away more fat and developing more fat cells and things like that. But at the same time, obviously you still can put on weight on a low carb, high fat diet if the amount of fatty acids fluxing in to the fat cell is exceeding coming out. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. What do you think about that, Franziska?
That is brilliant. That is perfect. That's so good. And I think more people need to hear this, because I do see more people saying, well, I'm cutting my carbs down lower and lower. And I say, but what are you replacing that with? They say, I'm doing 10 grams of carb a day and I'm not losing weight. And I say, but okay, so you've cut it down to 10 grams of carb, and there's only so much protein you can have. Just about everybody on the planet consumes somewhere between 15 and 35% of their calories as protein. So if you're doing that low, you've got to be doing a lot of fat. How much fat are you doing? Are you adding like sticks of butter? I've seen people doing this, and that's a lot of fat. Unless you're extremely active and burning it all off, I do think that we need to just kind of come back to doing the whole foods and not doing a ton of added fats either. Fatty meats, fine, cheese, all of those things. But adding fat to your meals when it's already fatty, that can cause problems for people trying to lose weight. And I see it as particularly in women, but even with men sometimes too.
Yeah, very, very much so in women. I hear that all the time, a little bit, but yeah, men, it seems to be a breeze for us guys. Unfortunately, Franziska, women definitely have a harder time.
You guys are lucky that way, yes.
Unfortunately so. And we do have one more question, which we'll leave it as the last question, which was just in relation to what we were talking about earlier. And it's from MF, so I don't know who MF is, but he asks, or she asks, why should we not worry about the rise in LDL on a high-fat, low-carb diet? What do you say to that?
Well, I hope she was listening before when I said it, but I'll say it again. I think that we do need to look at that. We need to look at the LDL and see what's going on. How high is it? And really, it's that particle that we need to be looking at. If it's just higher than it's supposed to be, I've had people emailing me saying, my LDL is 130, and I say, that's great. That's ideal. I would love to have an LDL of 130. I'd be very happy with that. It doesn't have to be within that very narrow range that they set. But when it's very high, over 200, I would not be able to find a lipidologist who wouldn't say, we need to look at that and at least monitor it. Some of them would say, you need to go on a statin right away. Others would say, let's try some dietary things. But when it's extremely high, we do need to look at it. It is a risk factor. And I would love to see studies conducted on people doing low-carb, high-fat. I'll volunteer to give my blood and report what I'm eating and do it along with other people who react this way. And they can maybe track what goes on through our lifetimes and see, what happens with this diet. I think that's important. And so I don't say that we shouldn't worry about it. I say we need to look at it, see what else is going on, and but I don't want to be an alarmist either and say if your LDL is going up then you can't do low carb, because that's the other thing I'm seeing sometimes. They say, this person's LDL is off the chart and they're still on low carb, and I say you can still do low carb. You may need to change things around a bit. You may need to eat more monounsaturated fat, maybe up your carbs a little bit, maybe lower your fat a little, increase protein, whatever. Those are the things I did and it helped. So I think we need to just be aware of what's going on and make it very, very individualized.
Absolutely. And that's why we have people like yourself, Franziska, who can help us out, kind of decipher these codes that are kind of in us, and we need somebody with the right qualifications and the right knowledge to help guide us on our own personal health solution. So people can find you at lowcarbdietitian.com, is that right?
Lowcarbdietitian.com. And I have a new program that I'm just going to tell you about. It's not quite ready to go, but it's going to be an international program. It's an online 12-week plan to manage diabetes and prediabetes. It's called eattobeatdiabetieschallenge.com. And if you're interested, you can email me on my own website about it, or you can go to eattobeatdiabetieschallenge.com. If you're interested, it should be up in a couple weeks. But yes, if people want to work with me individually, I can do it through Low Carb Dietitian. If they want to join our program, they can do that as well.
Awesome, awesome. And you're also on Twitter at lowcarbRD. And then if they search for Low Carb Dietitian on Facebook, they should be able to find your Facebook page as well.
That's right. Yes.
Perfect, perfect. And as you said earlier as well, Franziska, you are in Keto Clarity. So if you do want to check out Keto Clarity, which is it's a good starting point for people, they can grab it via Amazon UK at smashthefat.com, Keto UK, or if you're in the US, head to smashthefat.com/Keto US, and you can grab your own copy there. Was there any other words of wisdom that you wanted to impart on our listeners at all today, Franziska?
Not really. Just as I said, try to keep it as whole foods based as possible. Don't be so worried about the different fatty acids. Make sure you're getting a real good balance, and make sure that you're looking at your own lab work to see what's going on, and see how you feel too. That's important. I didn't really talk about that, but not everyone needs the exact same amount of macronutrient ratios. We all have different amounts that make us feel best, so find what works for you.
Absolutely perfect advice. There's only one more thing to do, and that's to hear us smash it out to the camera. So on 3, Franziska, I want to shout smash it out to the camera. So 1, 2, 3.
Smash it out.
Awesome, sweet. So this is episode 77 or 78. I'm not really sure. When we get to 100, we've pretty much had about 50 people so far shout "smash it out." So we're going to have a whole "smash it out" episode of all the different people that have shouted "smash it out," from Eric Westman to Richard Feynman. So that should be
interesting. That'll be great. That's great.
Absolutely fantastic, Franziska. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I just encourage everybody to check out lowcarbdietitian.com and check out everything that Franziska has done.
Thank you, Sam. Take care.
Perfect. Take it easy, Franziska.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.